Today we're diving into the dark side of corporate greed and its devastating impact on our environment. It's a tale as old as time itself. Massive corporations, flush with more cash than some small countries, making decisions that actively harm the planet, all in the name of profit. Now look, I get it, profits are sexy. They buy you yachts with helipads, golden toilets, solid gold swimming pools to store your yachts with helipads in. But at what cost? Because here's the thing. The Earth isn't some disposable party barge you can just abandon once you've squeezed every last drop of fun out of it. It's our home. It's where we keep all our stuff, our, breathable air, drinkable water, those birds that we like. It's all here. And if corporations keep treating the planet like their own personal piggy bank, we're going to be left with a whole lot of nothing. So buckle up, because we're about to expose the dirty underbelly of corporate greed and its role in this slow-motion environmental car crash. And trust me, it's not going to be pretty. But hey, at least we'll have those golden toilets, right? Let's be honest, corporations aren't exactly known for their long-term thinking. They're more like that friend who blows their entire paycheck on a weekend bender, then spends the rest of the month living off ramen noodles and regret. Except, instead of ramen noodles, they're devouring our planet's resources. We're talking deforestation on a massive scale, turning pristine rainforests into barren wastelands just to grow another palm oil plantation. We're talking about overfishing the oceans to the point where Finding Nemo becomes less of a heartwarming kids' movie and more of a bleak documentary about the collapse of marine ecosystems. And why? Because to these corporations, short-term profits are the only things that matter. They're so busy chasing the next quarterly earnings report that they can't be bothered to think about the long-term consequences of their actions. It's like they're playing a game of Jenga with the planet, yanking out blocks one by one, convinced it won't collapse as long as they get their bonus this year. But here's a news flash. The planet doesn't operate on quarterly earnings reports. It operates on a timescale of millennia, and the damage we're inflicting now, that's going to be felt for generations to come. This isn't just about hugging trees and saving the whales, folks. This is about understanding that our economic system is fundamentally at odds with the health of our planet. And until we address that fundamental flaw, we're going to keep seeing corporations prioritize profit over the planet every single time.
Let's talk trash, shall we? Specifically, the mountains of it that corporations are churning out on a daily basis. We're talking about industrial pollution so bad it would make a landfill look like a spa retreat. We're talking about rivers so polluted they could double as chemical waste dumps. And don't even get me started on plastic. It's like the gift that keeps on giving, except the gift is a slow and agonizing death for marine life and the gradual poisoning of our food chain. But hey, at least it's cheap, right? Because that's the thing, corporations often choose the cheapest, most polluting methods of production because, you guessed it, it fattens their bottom line. They treat environmental regulations like pesky inconveniences, obstacles to be circumvented rather than rules designed to protect, the planet we all live on. They'll happily dump their toxic waste into rivers and spew their pollution into the air, externalizing the costs onto communities and ecosystems least equipped to deal with them. And when they're called out on it, they unleash an army of lawyers and PR flacks to spin it as job creation or economic growth. It's enough to make you want to scream, but then you remember that the air is probably toxic, so you just end up with a hacking cough and a sense of existential dread.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the rapidly melting glacier in the room: climate change. It's real, it's happening now. And it's largely driven by our addiction to fossil fuels. And who's been the biggest pusher of this addiction? Oh, right, the fossil fuel industry and the corporations that have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. We're talking about decades of misinformation campaigns designed to sow doubt and confusion about the science of climate change. We're talking about funding think tanks and experts to peddle climate denial propaganda. We're talking about lobbying governments to block any meaningful action on climate change. Why? Because transitioning to renewable energy sources would mean cutting into their profits, and we can't have that, can we? So, they choose to prioritize their short-term profits over the long-term viability of the planet. They're willing to gamble with the future of humanity. Also, they can keep their yachts afloat for a few more years. It's like watching a group of arsonists arguing over the best way to put out a fire while they're busy dousing everything in gasoline. It's absurd, it's infuriating, and it's got to stop.
Ever wonder how corporations manage to get away with all this environmental destruction? Well, it's not magic, folks. It's called lobbying. And it's basically just a fancy word for legalized bribery. You see, corporations have a lot of money, like a lot. And they use that money to influence politicians and policymakers to enact laws and regulations that benefit them, often at the expense of the environment and public health. They wine and dine politicians, shower them with campaign contributions, and unleash an army of lobbyists to whisper sweet nothings about economic growth and job creation into their ears. And it works. Politicians, ever eager to please their corporate donors, are all too happy to gut environmental regulations, weaken enforcement, and look the other way while corporations pollute our air, water, and land. It's a rigged system, folks, and it's designed to keep the powerful in power and the rest of us breathing in their toxic fumes.
Ever wonder how corporations keep their prices so low? Well, it's not because they're suddenly feeling generous. It's because they've figured out a way to shift the true cost of production onto someone else. Vulnerable communities and ecosystems in developing countries. We're talking about moving production to countries with lax environmental regulations, where they can pollute with impunity. We're talking about exploiting cheap labor, often in unsafe and exploitative working conditions. We're talking about turning a blind eye to human rights abuses, all in the name of a bigger profit margin. It's the ugly underbelly of globalization, folks, where corporations get to reap the rewards while someone else is left to deal with the environmental and social fallout. They talk a big game about corporate social responsibility, but at the end of the day, it's all about maximizing profits, even if it means sacrificing the well-being of others.
Have you ever bought a product that claimed to be eco-friendly or sustainable, only to find out later that it was all a load of marketing hype? Congratulations, you've been greenwashed. It's the art of making a company appear more environmentally friendly than it actually is, using misleading advertising, vague claims, and a whole lot of green imagery. They slap a picture of a tree on a bottle of toxic chemicals and call it natural. They donate a tiny fraction of their profits to an environmental cause and pat themselves on the back for their commitment to sustainability. It's all smoke and mirrors, folks, designed to appeal to your conscience, while they continue to engage in environmentally destructive practices behind the scenes. They know consumers are becoming more environmentally conscious, so they're trying to cash in on that sentiment without actually changing their ways. It's like putting a band-aid on a gaping wound and calling it a day. It might look good on the surface, but it does nothing to address the underlying problem.
Here's a harsh reality. The brunt of corporate-driven environmental devastation is not borne equally. It's the marginalized communities, the poor, the people of color, who often end up living on the front lines of pollution, bearing the brunt of the health consequences. We're talking about communities living next to polluting factories, breathing in toxic air and drinking contaminated water. We're talking about indigenous communities displaced from their ancestral lands to make way for mining and drilling projects. We're talking about a system that prioritizes corporate profits over the health and well-being of vulnerable populations. It's environmental racism, plain and simple. And it's a stark reminder that the fight for environmental justice is inextricably linked to the fight for social justice. We can't address one without addressing the other.
It's clear that corporate greed has far-reaching consequences for our planet and its inhabitants. From the air we breathe to the water we drink, our very existence is threatened by the relentless pursuit of profit at the expense of the environment. But this isn't a hopeless situation. We have the power to demand better, to hold corporations accountable for their actions, and to create a more sustainable and just future. It's time to see through the greenwashing, to call out corporate greed for what it is, and to demand that our leaders prioritize the health of the planet and its people over the profits of a powerful few. We need stronger regulations, stricter enforcement, and a fundamental shift in how we value our planet. The time for complacency is over. The future of our planet and our very survival depends on it. It's up to us to hold these corporations accountable and push for a more sustainable future.